What's up everybody? I've got to say a massive thank you for all the love and the support for all the videos that have been going up this week, the technical videos around the new cars. Massive appreciation. There is quite a lot of work goes into those, and it's quite a busy, stressful week this one that I really enjoy because I love this time of year. But it seems like you guys are loving it too, so I really appreciate that. Today though, it is back to some kind of normality. It is time to get through some questions in this week's Ask Elvis, and as I mentioned on Twitter earlier in the week, today I'm going to be taking all of those questions from within the Seedstream app. Now, if you don't know what that is, where have you been? I'll link it all in the description. But this is a new app that my mate has created and I'm helping along with it, and to say thank you to all of you guys who came over and started using the Seedstream app with me. I'm taking all of today's questions from within there, so thanks if you sent one in. I'm going to try and answer them now, and I've got a couple of helpers because it is half term. Right, let's get going. First question, please, Rex.
Right, this one...
Do you want to finish your mouthful first?
Yeah, okay. Right, first question from Jason Morgan. Looking at the aero of all the cars so far, is there anything you can see that says, wow, yes, that's going to work well?
Okay, good question. And lots of people have said to me, can you put the cars in order, pecking order of how you've seen them so far when they've been released? And the answer to that is definitely no. There's no point in trying to judge who's going to be quickest based on the reveal of a car, its photos, or seeing it even do a shakedown. You just can't tell. Has anything jumped out at me? I mean, it's almost impossible to tell from looking at them, because the only way you know something really is going to work well is when the teams are able to see it in their wind tunnel or in their CFD systems, you know, where they get actual data. The data doesn't lie, and that's what everything's based on in Formula One. So these details, some of them look really nice, and I have been really impressed by some of the design, some of the packaging around the rear end of the Mercedes, for example. Also the Red Bull, very different way of doing things. Some extreme kind of suspension setups on the Mercedes as well. So some really interesting details and things that I'm really impressed that people are going to those lengths and still pushing to those degrees, given that we're in the last year of this cycle of rules. But is there anything that says that's going to work? That's not one that I can answer. Only the people that can see the actual data will know the answers to that. And you can guarantee that everything that's on these cars is based on their interpretation of their data. So obviously no one's put anything on their car that they don't think is going to work.
This one's from Ben Guest, and he says, will the launch cars have the oldest possible parts on them in order to reveal as little as possible about the latest designs? Or is there no point in testing?
Is there no point when testing?
Is there no point when testing is so near? Also, how much time do the teams spend looking at these launch events, trying to pick apart the other teams' designs?
Very nicely read. So Ben, the answer to that one is that most of the time these launches, I mean, a lot of these launches are done with digital renders, aren't they? And that's a kind of trade-off between allowing your engineering department more time to actually work and produce the real parts of the car, and giving the marketing department something to reveal to the world for sponsors and for their own marketing benefits. So the digital renders, they can be anything, because that's just about changing some numbers in a CAD model. So the latest designs are definitely not on the cars. What you can pick up from, you know, the reveals of these cars, particularly when you see the actual car, is that a lot of the design around the chassis and those kind of things, and the concept that works around the chassis, well, those things can't be changed before testing. They are kind of baked into the design of the car. So there's a lot you can pick up from what a team's trying to do just by looking at the chassis design, things like the way that the side pod design works, the aero around all of that. Things like the details, like the barge boards and the front wings, they will definitely not be the latest and greatest, and they're obviously an area that's constantly being developed anyway. And to answer the last part of your question, how much the teams look at other cars, they absolutely will be poring over those cars in some detail as each one's released. Not necessarily because they want to go and take somebody's front wing and put it on their car, but what they will be looking for is ideas that maybe they haven't thought of, or maybe hasn't cropped up in their own sphere within their team, that they can then input into their digital models, their simulation models. You know, not a case of copy and paste an idea over, because it just won't work on someone else's car. But if there's an idea or a theory or a concept, you can start to bring that into your model and start to see if you can adapt it to work with the car that you've designed. So yes, they will take great interest in what everyone else has done, but more so at the test, when they're able to walk up and down the pit lane and get up close and personal with these cars, than they will be doing with the digital releases that most teams do nowadays. Next question.
Ali G.
Ali G?
Ali G. How high are you on Lando, Norris and Sainz? Do you think McLaren would attempt to sign a Ricciardo or Vettel for 2021? And if they think they can challenge for podiums, or do Lando and Sainz have that raw talent and ability to do it themselves?
Okay, so do we think McLaren need to sign some big name drivers in the future, or can Lando and Carlos Sainz do the job? Personally, I think they can do the job. I think the current lineup at McLaren is actually a really strong one. You know, both in terms of their talent, but also the fact that they're both young, they're both hungry for it, they both work very well together, they've both got a really good, fresh attitude, which is exactly what McLaren have needed over the last couple of years after the whole Alonso era, the difficult times that McLaren have had in recent years. This is exactly what they need now, to refresh and restart, and they're on this upward trajectory. If I was leading that McLaren team right now, I would absolutely be putting all my faith into those two guys for the medium to long-term future of that team. Next question, please.
Bjorn Koch, this is what he says. How do drivers decide what the best move is for them with such a major rule change coming for next season? Like Hamilton, he moved to Mercedes at the right moment.
Very good point, and that's a really interesting one, isn't it? Because there's so many drivers out of contract at the end of 2020. We know that a couple of the big players have already signed up, haven't we? Verstappen, Charles Leclerc, locked in now to longer term contracts. But it is a really difficult decision to make for drivers, and that's why they all timed their contracts to end at the end of 2020, to keep their options open for what might be coming for the future. How do you make that decision? Well, what's happening behind the scenes is a lot of these big movers are starting to talk to the teams, and the teams at that point, a little bit like what happened with Lewis Hamilton to Mercedes back in the day, was that the team can give you an idea of exactly what they're thinking. They obviously can't predict with any accuracy, you know, how they're going to fare in the pecking order, how they will compare to other teams, but what they can do is, like Mercedes were able to convince Lewis Hamilton that with this big rule change on the power unit side coming, they had a big advantage being a manufacturer team, being a team that was able to design the power unit in conjunction with the chassis and had a big kind of lead time in doing so. Had the resources to be able to kind of look at that in great depth, perhaps more so than many of the other teams, and certainly more so than McLaren were able to do at that time. And that was one of the key factors in convincing Lewis Hamilton to move. So there are things like that. There's obviously financial things. You know, you can look at the budget of these teams and how they're spending it, the resources that they have, how they might be able to use those resources to adapt to a big rule change. And those are the kind of details, together with other things like, you know, what's the ethos within a team? You know, are you the kind of driver that might thrive in a Red Bull kind of environment? You know, are you more a driver that might thrive under the perhaps a little bit more serious, meticulous nature of a Mercedes? You know, or are you someone that could cope with that almost fiery temperament that sits within Ferrari? So there are lots of different challenges with working for different teams, and some drivers suit those teams better than others. So there's a lot to take into consideration, but ultimately the performance in 2021 is a massive unknown at this stage. Next question, please.
Callum Puckering. How do teams decide what pit crew member is going to do what during a pit stop? For example, who will be the front jackman and who will be doing the front right wheel?
Good question, and quite a few people ask me this one actually, because it's and actually I do a lot of these kind of corporate talks where I'm talking about pit stops and the science behind them, and that's always the question that comes up is how do they decide? The reality is that teams decide that based on nothing more than ultimate performance, and I always say to people, there's no room for sentimentality in this idea of creating the perfect pit stop crew. So it doesn't matter if you've been there for 10 years or if you've been doing the front jack for 10 years. If somebody comes along who's quicker, who's more consistent, who might be able to do a better job than you, well, they get the job. And I think everybody understands that, because the ultimate goal of a pit stop, of course, is to be as fast as possible and as consistent and reliable as possible as well. So what typically happens is they'll try and keep the crew as consistent as possible over the course of a season, but at the end of a season there's always the opportunity for people to try out for different positions, to have a bit of a, almost like an audition. If you want to have a go at doing the front jack, there will be an opportunity for you to try it, and if it proves that you are kind of, you know, ultimately better at it for whatever reason, and obviously we're normally talking about tiny amounts, but if you are better at it, the job could end up being yours.
Next question from Boris Sandman. Is the announcement that the Stroll brought Aston Martin and they will sponsor Racing Point really a big change, or is it more like the name change they've gone through last year, being brought out because of the team's financial struggles? Do you expect them to rise up the midfield like McLaren and Renault cars?
Right, very nicely read, Ginger. Do we expect them to rise up the midfield? I think yes, and the main reason for that is finance. I mean, what comes with this deal with Lawrence Stroll, it's actually not so much to do with the Aston Martin link-up, but more that Stroll has bought the team, which we know obviously last year with his group of associates. That's what brings performance in Formula One. Not necessarily instantly, but being able to invest in the team, being able to invest in the resources, particularly at this crucial time now before the budget cap comes in. You know, having things like a new factory built, having wind tunnels built, you know, installing the very latest technology. Those are the things that build you a successful team. And those are the things that are happening right now. So the link up with Aston Martin, yes, it's largely a name association, but also more than that, it does bring a link up with Aston Martin's resources that come with that. And I don't mean necessarily financial resources, I mean things like what resources they might have as a manufacturer. And eventually, who knows, longer term, you know, they might be able to share some of that development with the road car side of the organisation, share some of the facilities that Aston Martin might have, some of the engineering talent that might be at Aston Martin already, perhaps could start making their way and crossing over towards the Formula One team as well. So yes, it will bring advantages. I don't think it's going to work at this stage anything like a Mercedes or a Ferrari manufacturer link up, of course. It's not the same process yet, but maybe at some point in the future it could develop into something like that. Of course, from 2025 we've potentially got a really big change in terms of how the power units might look in Formula One. Maybe that might be an opportunity for teams like Aston Martin to be able to get involved on that side of things, where it becomes far more relevant to their road car business and much more of an opportunity to join Formula One for them. Right, thanks very much guys, that was very good reading of the questions. It's going well so far, I like these questions, it's all been very easy to do through the Seedstream app, so thanks very much for everybody who's contributed. I'm going to head home, or we are going to head home with these guys, get the dogs back and we'll pick up some more there. Okay, back home and let's pick up some more questions. And I just wanted to drop this one in because this one comes from a guy called Mark Allison. And I kind of want to do this one because I want to throw it back to you guys because you'll probably know the answer better than I will. But he says to me, my wife wants to give me my Christmas present this October with a trip to the US Grand Prix in Austin. Lucky you. What's the best way to go about getting the best package deal for a trip like this? McLaren's becoming my favourite F1 team with their great young drivers and their great relationship. Well done. Congratulations on a Christmas present that you will never forget. If you've never been to a race before, I don't know if you have, but it's going to be spectacular. And the US Grand Prix is always an amazing event, an amazing show, great track, and it really is a spectacular thing to witness. So, not again. So anyway, the point was that I thought that you guys, many of you guys, will have a much better idea. Many of you guys will have a far better idea on the answer to that than I will. Because I've never done that trip as a package deal. I've never gone as a tourist. For fuck's sake. No, come on. We're not doing this again. So many of you will be far better placed to answer that question than I will, having never done that trip. But I know loads of you will have done that trip. Loads of you will have done it as a paying customer through package deals or whatever. So anyone who has got an answer or any way they can help Mark, by all means, please ping your answers into the comment section of this video, because he needs a bit of help. It's going to be the trip of a lifetime for him, and if you can make that even better than it already is going to be, he'll be very grateful, I'm sure. So there you go, Mark. Over to you guys. Right, Andy Lowe asks this one. Real testing was taken away to save costs, but with massive advances and costs in simulation tech and the ongoing updates they need, will we ever get back to some in-season planned test weekends, as they may now be the cheaper option for smaller budgeted teams? That's quite an interesting point. The reality is I don't think we will, because simulation, computational fluid dynamics, those kind of advanced simulation tools, I mean, they're the future. They are much more efficient way of going testing, and I know that they can be expensive to set up. But look, believe me, running a racing car around a racetrack is not a cheap way of going about doing it, and it's incredibly inefficient in terms of how you use and maximise that time for your budget. So CFD and things like that are definitely the way forward. What's interesting, I think, and this is a question that maybe links on, how far are we away from a complete designed car that never goes anywhere near a wind tunnel? You know, because I actually think, and I was talking to the guys in the aero department at Red Bull about this, I think over a year ago now, where they were saying they think they're very close now to the point where they won't even need a wind tunnel to develop their car, because CFD has advanced so much and is so accurate that they're actually almost 100% relying on it anyway. They are using the tunnel as backup and as another means to prove out philosophies and ideas. But the reality is that the CFD is so advanced and detailed and accurate, you can almost design a car around it now. So that's an interesting transition where technology has advanced to the point where these computer simulated tools are the most efficient, the most advanced and the most accurate way of designing these things. Jamie Sayer says, if it becomes apparent next year that DRS isn't a necessity for overtaking, how easy would it be for the FIA to simply not enable it? Would it have to be a rule change which would warrant a vote, or could the FIA just not enable it in lap 3 of a Grand Prix? Well, they are looking at DRS for 2021, which is what you're referring to. They don't really know yet if we're going to need DRS. The idea, of course, is that the changes to the cars mean that they're able to race much closer to each other, and DRS kind of isn't required anymore. They're still having it on the cars in the beginning just because it's there as an option. Now, there are two things to this question. First of all, the FIA, even today, are constantly looking at DRS usage and how it can be used, how many zones there should be in each racetrack. They're constantly changing that, what the zone length should be, where the activation points should be. They're constantly looking at that and adapting it on a case-by-case example. And that will continue, I'm sure. So if they decide a couple of races into 2021 they no longer need DRS, well then that absolutely can be implemented. And the reason that it will be able to be implemented so quickly and so effectively by the FIA is because the governance procedure for Formula One is actually changing for 2021 too. So the idea being that the way it is now is way too complicated, and as you rightly point out, we now need a vote and we need to get a majority, or in fact we need to get a unanimous decision by the teams to be able to make a change that late in the day. In 2021 that will change, and the idea is that common sense can be applied, and if there's a rule change that makes sense, the FIA or the governing body, Formula One, they can make that change without needing complete consensus from the team. So yes, I hope we all get to a point where DRS is no longer required. At the moment, they're hedging their bets, but the idea is that the changes being made for that season hopefully will eliminate the need for it in total. David O'Flanagan says, "Hi Mark, with all the car reveals now happening, how busy did it get at McLaren leading up to an unveiling? What does the team concentrate on, and how much does a car evolve from launch to testing?" Okay, incredibly busy period in the lead up to the reveal and therefore the shakedown and testing. Everything comes together in those last moments, and it might seem crazy that that's the way it works, but it's about maximising the development time and therefore the production time that you have. Ideally, you want to be producing these parts, have them roll off the production line at the last minute, because that means that your time in the drawing office and in development has all been maximised up until the final point where it can no longer, you have to literally push the button and produce these components. So that's the way it works. It's typically how it always works, and I'm sure it works that way at most teams. In fact, I was surprised this year how early Red Bull were able to get their car out on the circuit, being the first team to run a shakedown, nearly a week ahead of everybody else. That's impressive in one sense, but also means there's a week there that they perhaps have foregone some development to perhaps take some pressure off, to enable them to iron out teething troubles via that early shakedown, and perhaps they'll hit the ground running more when it comes to testing than those who have left it a bit later. So yes, it's an incredibly busy time. I mean, a lot of late nights. Many times I've done full all-nighters on the night before the car has to be ready, because before it rolls out onto a racetrack, it has to go off to a photographic studio to be photographed for the official pics. Now a lot of that is done by digital renders, granted, but back then it used to be the actual car had to be photographed. But either way, whatever your deadline is, if it's the point where the cars have to be pushed into a truck and driven away to the test or the shakedown, or whether it's getting them to a photographic studio, the days and hours building up to that moment are frantic, they are busy, they are lastminute.com, they are crazy. And I remember getting on the plane to Australia, because testing's the same, madness over testing, crazy hours. I remember getting to the plane to Australia, going to Heathrow, jumping on a flight for 24 hours and thinking, my goodness, I finally get to sit down for 24 hours and have a rest. That gives you an idea of what this period of time is like for the mechanics, building up to that all-important first race. How much does a car evolve between launch and testing? Well, it can evolve massively, and that can be because there can be a week between those two events for some people. It's always planned. It's not something you've suddenly discovered. Like last year when Mercedes brought their completely different car to week 2 of testing, it wasn't because they discovered something in the first week of testing or in the gap between. It's because that was always the plan. It's about hitting targets and working months back from those targets to the point where you're designing these components, when you have to sign off the designs for those components, when you have to send them to manufacturing and then testing and then getting them produced. And all of these milestones have to be hit at exactly the right moment to be able to end up with the exact part on the right place on the car at the right moment when it's absolutely needed to roll out on track. That's how meticulous Formula One scheduling is. Neil Cunningham says, Mark, all the drivers are in the public eye, so they have to be relatively polite about each other. But do any drivers really actually hate each other? That's a great question. I mean, honestly, I've known drivers that do hate each other. And I don't think I would be dropping any massive revelation if I tell you that in 2007, at large parts of that year, Lewis Hamilton and Fernando Alonso hated each other. That won't come as a surprise to many people, but it was very clear, very obvious. There was no love lost between those two come the end of that season. So that's probably the most high-profile occasion that I've seen, but I've known lots of drivers that haven't got on. Whether they hate each other, that's a strong way of putting it, but there are lots of drivers that look like good buddies in front of the cameras that genuinely aren't, and I'm not going to name names for those. Some of them are still racing.
That was a good question.
Right, let's finish with this one from Vincent Platt. And thank you for all the questions. There are loads, and I'm just not going to get to them all, but maybe we'll do this again, and either way I'll still be answering questions constantly, as I do all the time, inside the app and inside the comments of this YouTube video, and we'll do this again every week as normal. But Vincent Platt asks this one to finish us off. He says, "Hi Mark, I like your videos, keep up the good work. Thank you very much. In 2018, McLaren and 2019, Williams had fundamental problems with their car. What kind of issues are these and why is it so difficult to solve? What can teams do to prevent those issues? Well, the last part of the question is perhaps the most difficult to answer because, of course, none of them expect those issues. So they're all doing everything they think they can to prevent those issues happening in the first place. Clearly, those two teams on those examples you've mentioned there made mistakes, and that's the nature of mistakes. You don't expect it, you don't plan for it, it's a mistake, and something went wrong. Those issues, to put them into perspective, certainly on the McLaren, because I know a bit more of the detail about this, they had an issue that was so kind of entrenched in the design of their chassis, and it centred around the distance. I actually did a video on this if you want to go and check it out when they launched last year's McLaren. The distance between the kind of front wheels, the front wing, that whole area of cleaning up the area of messy airflow around the front tyres, the distance between there and their side pod was essentially they got that wrong. Now, that might seem like a really basic fundamental problem that a team like McLaren should never get wrong. But look, all of their numbers obviously said it was okay, and it wasn't until they got it onto the racetrack they realised that it wasn't okay. And the problem was that there wasn't enough space to be able to clean up the flow coming off the back of the tyre and deal with it effectively before it reached that crucial area around the front of the side pod. Because of that, they had massive downforce producing issues. They had huge troubles with the car going through corners as well, with the steering turned, and how that impacted the flow around the front of the side pod. Now, they are it's a serious issue because when it's on track, it manifests itself in massive dramas in terms of downforce, and then you start getting into tyre management issues as well. And essentially, you just cannot get the best out of your car with a problem like that. Why couldn't they fix it? Well, it was probably a very tough decision to be made at McLaren at that point because they realised that problem relatively early on, but the only way to fix it really was almost a complete redesign of the car, of the chassis. Now, the chassis is the central part of the car. It's the main thing that everything else is centred around. You don't normally redesign your chassis at all throughout a season. You design a chassis, the development all happens in the periphery bits around that. To design and produce a new chassis is a huge task. Not only is it a big piece, but it has to go through the most rigorous crash testing. It's an enormous chunk of your resource taken up to go back in and redesign that. Then you need to redesign everything else that, of course, attaches to it. Essentially, what you'd be doing is creating a brand new car at some way through the season. And yes, that is possible. We've done that many times in the past, but today, with the lack of testing, with the lack of resource in comparison to the old tobacco-funded era, if you like, it's no longer the quick and easy fix that it might have. Well, it was never an easy fix, but it's no longer an achievable fix like it used to be. I imagine for Williams last year, they had something similar. They found a fundamental flaw in their design that couldn't be rectified because it was a complete chassis redesign, and that's not something, certainly not that a team like that can do mid-season when you're also trying to focus on the car that's going to be developed for the following season as well. So, tough couple of years for those teams, but it's pleased to say that McLaren taken a giant leap forward, having rectified that for the following season, and I'm hoping and perhaps expecting that Williams will do something similar this year. Right, thank you very much, guys, for all of these. If you haven't got the Seedstream app, I will link all the details in the description of this video. It is great. I'm really loving using it, and so thank you for all of those who are interacting on there with me every day. It's been a real revelation, I think, to see this app being used by so many people. The feedback that's coming in is really helping my mate Ollie to help this kind of development path on the app, and there are some exciting things to come. So check it out if you haven't got it. It's called Seedstream, available in the app stores. It's worth going to check it out. Anyway, thanks ever so much for all the videos again. I really appreciate all of, sorry, not the videos, the questions. Really appreciate all the questions and the time you take to put into those. I really do. I'm grateful for them, so thank you. Again, thanks for all the love for the car reveal videos. More of those to come, and of course will be all across testing and everything that's happening between now and the first race. So if you're not yet subscribed to this channel, hit that button, subscribe now, and hopefully you won't miss another thing. For now, thank you very much, and I will catch you very soon. Ta-da.